guys, we're going to continue with this program. Are you guys enjoying yourselves? Are you learning a lot? Are you feeling inspired? Just checking in, yes? My best friend? All right, just checking. All right, next we have Ramesh Srinivasan, one of the board directors of the Akanksha Education Fund. He's going to be moderating a fireside chat about global trends in education, because education is also fashionable. All right, guys? Just here to remind you that. So please could you welcome on stage Ramesh Srinivasan on stage. He will be talking with the professor and former dean of Harvard Business School, Nitin Nohria, and also, please welcome on stage. And also Rebecca Winthrop, Senior Fellow and Director at the Center for Universal Education. Wow, what a bunch of underachievers. Please put your hands together and welcome our first panel for this evening.
Thank you. Firstly, what a lovely audience. Thank you all for being here. Lovely to see many Akanksha supporters. I also see many new people. Lovely to have all of you here. Rebecca and Nitin, thank you so much for joining us today. And Sandeep, thank you for an amazing presentation. I wanted to actually step back from India, Rebecca, a little bit to what's happening in the world. At McKinsey, we've published a lot of research on the impact of COVID on learning outcomes, on mental health of kids, and what's happening in the world of education. It's been a major disruption. What do you see happening in the world of education?
Yeah, he gave me a preview of this question, and I was thinking about it on the train ride up, and I was like, there's so much happening. What would I say? But I think for me, three major things stand out. And Sandeep gave a great preview, which was in this awesome intro. And one is something I'm quite worried about. There's two things I'm stressed about and one thing I'm happy about. So I'll give you the happiness at the end. The first one is this move in many countries around the world, in the US and India and many countries, of a sort of move back to basics. There is a big narrative coming out of COVID of, massive disruption. Our kids, the term learning loss, which all of us have heard, is I think the stupidest term I've ever seen. What do you mean you lost? Where are you going to go find it? Like, kids are where they are, and we need to support them. And the narrative of sort of learning loss, it freaks school leaders out, it freaks teachers out, it freaks governments out. Like, oh my God, we have to catch up, we have to catch up. No, you need to support kids at all times achieve to their abilities. And what I'm seeing happen, and we work with a lot of networks and policymakers and ecosystem players in education systems across many countries at our center at Brookings, and almost to a T, they're so worried about this learning loss that they're saying, we just need to focus on literacy and numeracy. That's what we need to do. And literacy and numeracy is incredibly important. It is the gateway. If you've ever spent time with people who cannot read, your world is very small. So I'm not saying it's not important. But what I have seen in doing education reforms and trying to do, we've done lots of research on leapfrogging inequality, studying innovations, how do you scale them so you could actually leapfrog, and how do systems take them and digest them and use them. And what I've seen over and over is when you create something that you say it's just the floor, it's the minimum we need to do. And so everyone who's focused on, we need to really just hone in, focus on learning loss, getting those literacy and numeracy rates up. Nobody is a bad person. They care deeply about equity, and nobody is saying that's all we should do. But the floor, they'll say it's the minimum, but the floor quickly becomes the ceiling. This is what happens in education systems over and over. You focus on something, oh, that's the minimum, and then we'll progressively add other sets of skills, but quickly it becomes the ceiling and that's all you do. So I'm really worried about that. I think Akanksha does an incredible job of making sure that the floor doesn't become the ceiling. And there's all sorts of things that we can do while you're teaching literacy and numeracy, and it's literally around the pedagogy, how you teach, that develops things like creative thinking, collaborative problem solving, and we need to hold on to that. I think Sandeep gave great sort of overview of why, but in general, I think the core problem is that most education systems, I would take it even further than what he said of sort of education systems aren't really designed for low-income students, for sure, but they're actually not designed that's not how people learn. Like, they're not designed for anybody. They're not aligned to the learning sciences. And the systems that we have today are really because we were trying to reach scale. And they came out of Prussia in the mid-1700s because they wanted to train their military because they were losing wars. And it's not aligned to the learning sciences. So we need to hold on to that vision. So that's number one. Number two thing that I'm also quite concerned about is that also coming out of COVID or during COVID, there was this incredible opening up of schools and systems to all the supports that exist in families, in communities, in businesses, in social institutions, in religious institutions, in media and technology that sort of came during COVID and were allies to schools. And I think actually to leapfrog, a lot of the research we've done on leapfrogging, where we've looked around the world and said what are the things that will help leapfrog, is if you can create this idea of a local learning ecosystem where you do bring families and communities first and foremost, and Akanksha is best in class in that. I say, not just because I'm here, I say it everywhere. And we know that schools that have close relational trust, close bonds with teachers and school leaders and families and communities are 10 times more likely for kids, or are 10 times better for kids on many outcomes. Actually, virtually every outcome: academic outcomes, social emotional learning outcomes, mental health outcomes, teacher retention outcomes. And that's something that's, I think, quite forgotten. And that was the good part of COVID. And I actually had a lot of hope. I was like, this is great. We're supercharging local learning ecosystems. And I am also seeing a retrenchment of that, of like, we're overwhelmed. Teachers are overwhelmed as they should be, because it's incredibly hard in every country around the world. And systems are like, we just need to go back to the way it was and focus on literacy and numeracy. So those are my two concerns. The third thing that I do see happening in many countries around the world that I think is quite positive is a real serious renewed attention on well-being and student engagement, and that includes mental health. We know that kids around the world cannot learn well if they don't feel well. If they have mental health problems, depression, anxiety, most kids in low and middle income countries, 75% have no sort of support or treatment for depression and anxiety if they have it. If kids feel like they don't belong, if they're worried, if they're afraid, if they're unsafe, they're taking up headspace around just surviving and navigating, and that literally doesn't even give them brain space to learn. So I think this is something that people have recognized and beginning to take it much more seriously. So I think that is very positive.
Thank you, Rebecca, for that overview. Nitin, question for you. You even in our preparation, you were saying you're not the expert on education like Rebecca. So maybe question, why should a broader set of audience, beyond just students, parents, the deep K through 12 experts, why should business leaders, wider community care about education?
So thank you first and foremost for having me here, and thank you all for coming. I'll share a story which may sound initially strange. So 10 years ago, I had the greatest privilege of my life of being able to celebrate 3 generations together in Antarctica. My father had just turned 80, and this was, for him, the first time to reach his 7th continent. I had turned 50, and it was my opportunity to reach the 7th continent. And my 2 daughters, Reva and Ambika, Reva had just barely turned 20, and she had already reached her 7th continent. So here we were, 3 generations together on a magical trip, But if you go to Antarctica, you have a lot of alone time. And we suddenly remembered how extraordinary it was that these 3 generations could be in this place at that time. See, my father grew up in a village in India called Dharamkot. Until 20, he had never seen anything other than Dharamkot. That was his life. That is where he grew up. He got a scholarship to go to Banaras Hindu University. To this day, we don't know who gave that scholarship. But if he hadn't gotten that scholarship, my father would have stayed in Banaras Hindu University he would never have had the opportunity to go to Banaras Hindu University and would have stayed in that village of Dharamkot his entire life. My father, by virtue of having gone to BHU, had an extraordinary career in India. He made a life for himself, and he gave me and my sister, his 2 children, extraordinary opportunities. But till the age of 21, I too had never left India. So I may have left a village, I saw all of India, but I never left my country. To get to this country, I too needed one scholarship. If I didn't get a scholarship, there was no opportunity for me to have come to this country. And I remember applying to 20 schools, and I got only one scholarship. Happily, it ended up being at MIT, which was the place that I most wanted to go to. But I've often wondered what would have happened to my life if I hadn't gotten that scholarship. I'd probably have had a good life, but I wouldn't be sitting here and I wouldn't have been invited to this program as Dean of Harvard Business School. So that one scholarship profoundly changed the arc of my life, and it created possibilities for me that I would have never enjoyed, and as a result of which, my children then had this opportunity, even before age 20, to be able to live a life that neither my father or I could have ever dreamt of. So I share this story with you because I know of nothing in life that can change not just an individual's arc of life, but generations to come as a result of education. So right after this trip, my daughter went to Akanksha. My older daughter, she had just finished high school. And my brother-in-law, we've been involved in Akanksha for a long time. Our family had been involved in Akanksha for a long time. And if you've ever had a child go to India, you know that all they do is roll their eyes and they say, why did you take me there? All I'm going to do is go from one relative to another, and they're endlessly bored, and they, go from kis auntie ke ghar jana, like which auntie and which uncle's house do I have to go to today? So it's like the most extraordinarily boring thing that you could do. And so someone said, why don't I take you to an Akanksha school? Maybe that'll be a change and a break from something that you might do. And so my daughter went to this Akanksha school, and she said, this is a better education than I got at Windsor. And here we were. We had sent our daughter to what we thought was the best private school that money could buy. And so we said, what made it so special? She says, there's a joy in creativity in this school that I have never seen. Children were engaged in their education in a profound way. So that made us believers in Akanksha. You will meet today. I think the real stars of the show will be the alumni of Akanksha that you meet. So I know in this room there are people who are extraordinarily generous. There are many Harvard Business School alums in this room. They have been generous to Harvard Business School. Thank you.
Once a dean, always a dean.
But one thing I learned when I was dean of Harvard Business School is that I used to say to my alum that I actually don't want to be first on your list of generosity. I want to be fifth on your list of generosity, because there's so many other things that I know you're generous for that actually deserve to stand in line first before we do. I do want to be fifth, just to be clear. There was no confusion about that. And by virtue of being fifth, I still raised a lot of money for Harvard Business School. But I used to always feel like there was something in schools like Akanksha, and there may be other causes that you're passionate about. I think that we need to first address the people who are needy, and then we need to invest in excellence too. But if we don't invest in the people who are needy, we'll never get the next generation of excellence. So we have to be able to make an investment in places like Akanksha. And whether Akanksha inspires you, I hope it does. That's the reason why I'm here. Or something else inspires you. I do hope that a place like Akanksha will be in the top 5 lists of the things that you care about.
Thank you, Nitin. Appreciate that thought. Nitin did tell me there are a number of donors to Harvard Business School. Just make sure you cover all of them and make sure to contribute as much as they do to Akanksha as well. Maybe, Rebecca, I'll go back to you. Nitin already highlighted a couple of things that Akanksha does well around engagement of kids inculcating creativity. In your research, what are things that you've seen Akanksha do well?
I mean, first of all, I think they do lots of things well. But again, I'm gonna go back to what you guys were nominated, and I think it's top 10 of the world's best schools. I was part of the folks who helped design the world's best school prizes, and I was so pleased that Akanksha got nominated for the parents and communities. So when we say Akanksha, one of their three pillars is, engaging with parents and communities. It's not what we might all think of in this room. I don't know what, you might be doing all sorts of wonderful things with your kids. I'm like feeling guilty, like 7 continents. In general though, the average parent is maybe going to back to school night, saying, have you done your homework? Do you need sports equipment for the soccer team, right? Stuff like that. That is what I would call involvement. We are sort of passively doing what the school is telling us to do, and frankly, schools rarely ask us to do more. Akanksha has got a totally different model. They are inviting the families in. They know if you are working with kids in poverty, it's like probably 20% of the battle. I'm not sure how much you would say is the battle, is getting the kids to the school and being able to teach them and work with them. They have a million things that are barriers. There's health, there's food, there's transportation, there's being able to have time and space and a place and get a pencil and do your homework, all sorts of things. And Akanksha does this one of the most moving things, having interviewed parents there and done focus groups, is this, they do real engagement where they teach parents how to literally listen to their kids. And that bond and connection is something we should probably replicate around the world, where they bring parents in with kids, with the teacher. This was one particular tiny practice amongst many, and say, parents, look into your kids' eyes. So first of all, Indian parents, American parents would be like, what? That's weird, like looking into your, what the heck? Usually you tell them, go clean up or whatever. And tell your child something sometime when you were scared.
Right.
That shifts the dynamic immediately. All of a sudden, parents become vulnerable, children see, like it's a totally different relationship. That is incredible engagement on behalf of a school. And that connection sustains all sorts of work. They also do all sorts of things where they invite parents in for shadow days. Come, spend a day with your child. Go to every single class, see what's going on, ask questions to us afterwards. It's just a totally different model, and it brings such sort of trust, buy-in, and collaboration. And it's something every school should do. And it's, again, I work at Brookings. Our center does research around the world. We work with lots of ministries of education and organizations, and our currency is research. And Akanksha is one of the few places that actually uses the research in child development, which for 30 years has said when parents and families are aligned and supporting what schools and doctors and other adults are doing in a child's life, the kids do massively better.
Thank you, Rebecca. I see that we're out of time. Maybe, Nitin, one last question for you. So if somebody were to consider Akanksha, understand Akanksha better, I know you and your family have been involved for 20 years. What are the kinds of things they can do? Obviously, they can go visit a school and see what happens, but what questions would you be asking? How should they evaluate and understand Akanksha better?
So one of my truly dearest mentors who sadly passed away too early was a professor by the name of Sumantra Ghoshal. And he used to have this phrase that you can tell a place in 10 seconds by the smell of the place. You walk into a room and you walk into an organization, and most organizations, you can just walk in and you feel like, God, this is boring. Or any of you who work in a company, you'll know like companies where you feel that you light up versus companies where you feel like this is just enervating. Walk into an Akanksha school, I promise you, it'll be a place that'll make you feel like you light up. And if it lights you up and it lights up these children, that's the best experience you can have.
Thank you, Nitin. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Nitin. Lovely to be here. And we'll continue the conversation after the event over drinks. So thank you all. Thank you both. Thank you.